Continuing on with our loops discussion, we've moved on from while. We're now looking at the for statement. Similar purpose in that it enables you to loop and execute some code multiple times. Let's check the syntax out for that and then go through and check out a real demonstration of it in practice. So here's the for statement. It executes code a specific number of times, and it's very useful if you know ahead of time how many times it needs to run. And here's the syntax, as you can see on the screen now. So it starts with the word for, and then in brackets, we start with an initializer, and that's usually sets the variable that we're actually using for conditions, in this case I. So we're setting the first value of I to 0. Then there's a semicolon, and then there's the Boolean expression, which is the true or false, so I less than 5. So in other words, the for loop is going to continue until that statement returns false. Then the last one is the code to execute each iteration. In this case, I++ means to add 1 to the value of I. So it's just a little bit of a different way of looking at things than what the while statement was. Break still works the same as does continue. So let's go and have a look at that in Java now and just see how that operates using the same code for the while loop. Okay, so here we are in the code again, and you can see on screen I've got the while. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change this instead of the while to make this a for loop, because the principles are the same. We want to go through the entire elements, all the elements that are in that array at a designated number of times. So we can do that again using the for statement. So first things first, I'm going to comment that out, the while. And what we want to do is replace that with a for. So we're going to type for int index pos equals 0. Actually, before I continue, I'll just delete that because we don't need the index pos there anymore because we're initializing and setting it up in here in the for loop. Equals 0. Index pos less than elements dot length and I index pos plus plus. So again, looking at this, so we're initializing index pos to 0 first. That's the first part of the for statement. And again, you can see that we've removed this the index pos setting or variable up there, which incidentally, by initializing the integer here, the variable here, as soon as we exit out of this block of code, out of this loop, and come down to here to this line of code, index pos will no longer exist as a variable. So its scope as such is only while we're in this loop. So anyway, so we've initialized it to the value we want to start with. We've got our test, our Boolean expression, and that will continue. The for loop will continue until that is set to false, or that returns false, I should say. So in this case, of course, the first time we run it, it's not going to be false because the elements.length is greater than index pos. And then this statement here is to be executed every time we go through the loop. So in other words, at the end of the loop, it will happen automatically. So we can use this plus plus here. Now the other thing we don't need to do anymore, we don't need to manually update index pos. So we can delete that. And the reason that we can do that is that it's automatically updated with the for loop. When we were using the while loop, we had to manually update that ourselves because there was no provision for doing that. But the for loop, we're able to do that automatically because that forms part of the statement, the syntax for that for loop itself. So really everything else here, the code, is very similar to what it was. What we'll do is we'll start off by just commenting out these bits in the middle. And I'll take out 100 and minus 1. So we go back to what it looked like the first time we ran this in the while loop. Let's run that. We should get the answer of 35 if my memory serves correct. And you can see it's done essentially the same thing as the while loop has done. It's gone through the 5 elements of the array and automatically added them up. And the sum total was 35. And we'll just return those values again. Save. Do the same thing. Sum total was 134 because that was 35 plus 100 is 135 plus minus 1. And that's because I've commented out these two values here so they aren't being processed. So then if I uncomment those so that it'll perform and do the same thing as we did in the previous while code, we should get exactly the same as happened before. We've got our continue, that's working again. Our continue has skipped the value of 100, again exactly what happened in the last case. And continuing on, the value, once it got to -1, it did a break and exited. So you can see that very similar. There's a little bit less code because we didn't have to manually update index pos ourselves. And it's good in the sense that it automatically cleans up the variable index pos once the for loop has finished its processing. So as you can see, not a lot of difference to the while statement. So that was the first part of the for statement. There is a variation which we have seen in the Java tutorials before briefly, and that's the for each. So this one here, we set a variable and we sort of manually did it that way, and we processed it element by element. But there is another way of doing it, and that's using the for each. Okay, so how do we change this to use the extended version of for, which is the for each? Let's start by commenting that out. And it's a lot easier. We can put for int, and we'll call it element. That'll be the element contents, colon, elements. Now what that does, it automatically creates the integer element contents and updates that as we cycle through the loop. So we need to make a few little changes to our code to support this. What we'll need to do is copy this element contents and paste it in here because we don't need to use index pos anymore. Now note with this, there's no provision to have a counter. In this version here, we had index pos, which was our counter, as sort of our position that we're working with, but that's not possible with a for each. So what we'll have to do is just get rid of that index, delete it like so, and then we'll just paste that last version in. So again, I'll just clear these other two lines out to make it a bit clearer. So you can see the code is a lot more concise than what it was before. So we've got for int element contents colon elements. So again, what that's saying is the colon elements means that's telling Java that this is an array, and I want you to go through that element by element through that entire array. And for each item, as you go through the loop, I want you to associate whatever the variable that is in that position, in that slot, in that array position, into the variable called element contents. Same deal with this variable. It's only set for the scope of this for loop. Once we get down to here, once we've exited the loop, then the element contents won't exist. It's created purely for this loop. So if we run this, we get exactly the same as there was before. It goes through and calculates the elements 5, 7, and 12 to get 24, and then it hit 100. We had that code in to continue, and then we did a break as we did before. So it can be easier, better syntax. I like it better because I think it's more readable. Your code is more readable. There's less code, as you can see. It's more elegant, and overall, it's not suitable for everything, because if you do need a counter for some reason, you probably want to revert back to the previous example where we use that individual counter. Alright, so that was the two versions of the for loop.